Game of Thrones has proven itself to be one of the most badass shows in television history. There are moments that just get us so excited that we think we could take on the Night King in one-on-one combat. Today, we've put together some of Game of Thrones' most badass moments and put them all in one badass list. Enough talk, let's get into it right now! Although Game of Thrones has had a lot of badass characters throughout its run, none have left quite an impact like Khal Drogo in Season 1. In his limited, mostly silent screen time, the mighty Dothraki warrior had a number of moments that cemented him as the show's biggest badass. His best moment comes from finally putting the slimy Viserys in his place. We know that Khal Drogo is capable of ripping a man's tongue out with his hands, so we're wondering just what Drogo's gonna do to the drunken, belligerent Viserys in the holy Dothraki city, where shedding blood is not allowed. Fortunately, Drogo finds a loophole. Viserys was always clamoring on and on about getting a big old crown, so Drogo's nice enough to finally give him one. While holding him down, Drogo melts gold medallions and then pours the molten hot gold over Viserys' head, killing him horribly. Whoever said the Dothraki can't give good gifts? If you want to show a character as badass, make their very first scene take place as they butcher an animal. Tywin just exudes a powerful presence naturally, but seeing him berate Jaime while cutting up a stag just gives Tywin's introductory scene a bit more oomph. As the Lannister patriarch removes the animal's guts and internal organs, he also makes it known just how cunning and ruthless he is, openly questioning why Ned Stark is still alive and subtly revealing his contempt for Tyrion. We had all heard rumors that Tywin was the most powerful man in Westeros, and after this scene and witnessing him skinning a dead animal, we were fully convinced that Tywin Lannister was not a man to be taken lightly. We mean, just look at the way he wipes Jaime's smug look off his face for once. Any man that can do that should not be messed with. It was the moment we were all waiting for. When Daenerys was first introduced, she was being sold by her brother to the Dothraki, and generally wasn't in the most powerful position. Though the first season had her slowly learn to become more assertive, and we were left waiting for her true breakout moment. At the end of Season 1, things looked dire for Daenerys. Khal Drogo was dead, her baby was born a mutated lizard monster, and most of the Dothraki had abandoned her. All she really had were 3 dragon eggs that might as well have been glorified paperweights. Everything changed, though, when she stepped into that massive fire at Drogo's funeral. Although everybody thought this was suicide, they were awestruck the next morning when she emerged from the flames unburnt, with 3 brandy new baby dragons. She entered the flames a girl, but emerged a dragon queen, ready to take on the whole world. Early on in the series, the Hound was a complicated character. He was a feared fighter and an intimidating presence that could make even the strongest men run away in fear. And although he seemed to follow whatever orders his king gave him, including slaughtering Arya's butcher boy friend, we got the sense that there was a certain amount of goodness within him buried beneath all that anger and profanity. One of his early badass moments happened in Season 2 when a riot broke out in the city, and King Joffrey handled it with as much grace as a bratty child. In the scuffle, Sansa was separated from her guards and was almost assaulted by 3 commoners. When all hope seemed lost, it was the Hound who showed up and turned them into shish kebabs before comforting Sansa. Although sometimes morally gray, the Hound deep down is a good person. The Battle of Blackwater was one of the first big battles shown in Game of Thrones, and it did not disappoint. Stannis Baratheon's assault on King's Landing was a long time coming, and it was up to Tyrion to figure out a way to stop the enemy. He learned that Cersei's plan was to launch wildfire at the enemies from a distance, which is incredibly stupid, as one mistake and the whole city would go up in flames. Tyrion decides on a different approach, sending a Trojan horse-like ship out to meet Stannis' forces in Blackwater Bay. But it would take an extremely skilled archer in order to pull off the plan, so of course, resident badass Bronn was the one tasked with this important job. We've seen Bronn do awesome things before, but launching the arrow that ignites the wildfire-drenched ship gave us even more respect for the sellsword. Give him a castle already! Tyrion has never been much of a fighter, but he knows when he needs to step up and save the day. The Battle of Blackwater wasn't looking good for the local residents of King's Landing. Stannis was knocking at the door with his army, and King Joffrey was quick to flee to the Red Keep in fear. Seeing their king run away totally crushed everyone's morale and made them question just who in the heck they were fighting for. As they debated surrendering and giving up, it was Tyrion who rallied the troops with an amazing speech that renewed their passion for fighting. He then was the one to lead the men outside of the secret gate and get behind Stannis' forces and wipe them out. Was Tyrion rewarded for this badass moment? Nope, he was betrayed and had his face sliced open by a Lannister soldier in orders from his sister. The two things we know about Daenerys is not to mess with her dragons, and she doesn't look too kindly upon slavers. So really the whole Astapor situation was bound to end poorly. When a slave master offers her total control of the feared Unsullied army in return for a dragon, we were left wondering what exactly the Dragon Queen was going to do. If you guessed slay all the slave masters while burning everything to the ground, you'd be right. The Astapor masters were foolish in thinking that they could enslave a dragon, and they paid for it dearly with their life. In the end, Daenerys got control of a massive army without enslaving them, but rather as loyal free men, and got to keep all 3 dragons. It was a total triumph, and was a great first step in Daenerys' quest to reclaim the Iron Throne. Finally, the Dragon Queen was moving in the right direction. Season 3 changed all of our minds about Jaime Lannister. Where we first thought of him as nothing more than a smug villain who enjoyed sleeping with his sister and throwing young boys out of windows, Season 3 started Jaime on a path toward redemption when it paired him with Brienne of Tarth. Sometimes all it takes is for one person to really believe in us, and when Jaime bared his soul to Brienne, she didn't judge him, but saw that he was a man torn between his loyalty to his king and to his family. The world may hate Jaime, but Brienne recognized the good in him. This changed Jaime's character completely, and in one completely badass moment, he even dove into a bear pit without a weapon in order to save Brienne from certain death. It was moments like this that made us fully team Jaime, even after all the horrible things he did earlier. The end of Season 4 saw 2 of the show's greatest sword fighters face off against each other, Brienne of Tarth versus the Hound. This was a tough fight to watch, as 2 fan favorites fought in one badass fight to the death. Really, these 2 seemed evenly matched, and the fight quickly devolved into a drag-out bare-knuckle brawl. The usually honorable Brienne was forced to tap into some of her most animalistic tendencies to win. It's not exactly clear who had the most badass moment in the fight. Was it the Hound who grabbed Brienne's sword with his bare hands in order to stop it? Or was it Brienne biting off the Hound's ear and wailing on him until he fell off that cliff? This whole fight was awesome, but also seeped in tragedy, as really the 2 were only fighting because they both wanted to protect Arya. They just believed in different ways to do it. All Tyrion's life, the people closest to him wanted him dead. Then, after he was framed for murdering Joffrey, Tywin and Cersei finally saw an opportunity to get rid of him once and for all. But there's only so far that you can push a man before he breaks. Tyrion's trial felt like just one big setup. There was nothing he could do to defend himself, and when the final witness took the stand, it was all over. Hearing the woman he loved lie and accuse him of murdering Joffrey was just too much for him, and an angry Tyrion lashed out at the crowd and to his father. He didn't kill Joffrey, but he wished that he did. Watching the life drain from Joffrey's face while he choked gave him more joy than a kid on Christmas. And his final stare down with his dad as he demands a trial by combat is Tyrion at his most badass. Oberyn Martell swaggered into the show during Season 4 in a way Euron Greyjoy could only dream of. Right away, Oberyn was cool, cunning, and charismatic, but we didn't quite know what role he would play moving forward. We knew that he was after justice for his murdered sister, but we didn't know how he would go about getting it. Then Tyrion had his defiant trial by combat speech, which was awesome, but left him in a bit of a pickle. He needed someone to fight for him against Cersei's chosen champion, the Mountain. His go-to fighter, Bronn, was paid off by Cersei, and Jaime certainly couldn't do it. Just when it seemed Tyrion might have to fight the Mountain by himself, Oberyn stepped up and declared he would fight for Tyrion. Sure, it ultimately goes horribly wrong, but in that moment, Oberyn couldn't get any cooler, as it looks like he's both defending the helpless and getting his revenge. Daenerys' time in Meereen unfortunately was plagued by those pesky Sons of the Harpy, a rebellious gold mask-wearing group of insurgents who opposed the Dragon Queen's radical idea regarding not using people as slaves and property. Crazy, we know. This incredibly well-armed faction almost turned Meereen into a war zone, and their coordinated attack took out a good chunk of the Unsullied. Maybe it's because the Unsullied weren't used to fighting in close quarters, but early in Season 5 they had their butts handed to them by the Suns. When it seemed our favorite stoic eunuch Grey Worm was about to meet certain death, Sir Barristan arrived to save the day. Although not a young man, Sir Barristan took on 8 people single-handedly and was able to kill 7 of them himself. It was awesome and proved why the old knight was so revered back in the day. And although he ended up dying, he definitely earned our respect. Not surprising anyone, the Hound is really hard to kill. He's big, he's intimidating, he's likely to call you something that we can't really repeat on this video, and overall he just seems too stubborn to die. Although we're led to believe Arya leaving him to die was the end of the story, the Hound actually went on living, taking up with the friendly Septon Rey, who tried to teach him maybe violence just wasn't always the way. But of course, this is Game of Thrones we're talking about. Of course violence is the only answer. After Rey is killed by Rogue Brotherhood without Banner soldiers, the Hound gets his killer instinct back, which is definitely not a metaphor. And boy oh boy does he hunt. If you didn't know it already, don't get on his bad side. Can somebody be incredibly badass yet extremely stupid? Jon Snow seems to prove that answer is yes. For a man who knows nothing, Jon finds himself constantly in the center of the show's most badass moments, including staring down Ramsey Bolton's stampeding army at the Battle of the Bastards. It's an amazing shot, with Jon bravely ready to attack against what seems like 10 billion horses with just one sword. But really, it's his fault for being in the situation in the first place. Everybody warned Jon not to go charging in, but when Ramsey's threatening Rickon, Jon just can't help but charge into battle. And because Rickon can only run in straight lines, apparently, he dies in Jon's arms, prompting him to charge forward like the foolish action hero we've come to know him as. So yes, his reasoning is flawed, but that doesn't make his potential final stand all the less epic. Hey, here's a bright idea. How about you don't make the craziest woman in Westeros walk naked through the streets, utterly humiliating her? That should have been the mindset of the High Sparrow and the rest of his religious fanatics when they took Cersei prisoner, but clearly they didn't know just who they were dealing with, and the extreme Cersei would go to for revenge. In one badass moment, Cersei changed the entire landscape of King's Landing by turning the Great Sept of Baelor into a crater using wildfire, obliterating everyone inside, including the Sparrows, most of the Tyrells, and the rest of the useless nobility still alive. Yes, it came at the cost of her own son Tommen, who decided to take the expressway down from the top of his tower to the ground, but in the end, it ultimately made her queen. So we guess that sort of evens out. Badass? Yes. Extreme? 100%. Not since Olenna, Queen of Thorns Tyrell, was introduced has a character made such a memorably fierce entrance until Lyanna Mormont. We just didn't know what to expect. She looks like a young girl in over her head, but when she starts speaking, you know you better shut the heck up and listen. In just a few scenes, she quickly skyrocketed to a fan-favorite character with her steely determination and pint-sized ferociousness. One of her most badass moments came when a bunch of whiny old men needed to be put in their places. She kindly reminded them all in front of an entire room of people that basically they were all cowards, and that the only one who deserved to be called the King of the North was Jon Snow. Her speech inspired everyone, and we're pretty sure even Jon didn't mind being king after that speech. Okay, just kidding. We know Jon hated every minute of it. If we had to make a list of all the worst houses in Game of Thrones, House Frey almost certainly takes the top spot. Or the bottom spot, depending on how you look at it. House Frey, led by the disgusting human garbage pile Walder Frey, was never very redeemable. The dude was really known for two things: marrying an abundance of young girls and showing up late to battles to declare himself for the winners. If that wasn't bad enough, there was a little thing called the Red Wedding. Yeah, you might have heard of it. Anyways, Walder Frey deserved to have someone murder his children and bake them into pies, and hey, that's exactly what Arya did. In her first badass solo adventure after escaping from her boring Bravo storyline, she exacts revenge on Frey, and then proceeds to wipe out the entire house in one fell swoop. Good riddance, if you ask us. With Daenerys and her posse finally crossing that dang ocean, Season 7 finally saw her start her war against her enemies. This included the spectacular loot train attack, which is just one badass moment after the other. The Dothraki and Drogon fighting next to each other, slaughtering Lannister forces? Mind-blowing. Bronn heroically making his way to the gigantic dragon-killing crossbow and shooting Drogon? Wowza! A determined Jaime charging at Daenerys with a spear even though it probably meant certain death? Be still our hearts! But almost nothing can beat that fantastic shot of Drogon burning everything down in a blaze of fire. This battle was wild because with both sides having people we've come to care about, we just didn't know who to root for. Did we want Daenerys to burn Jaime and Bronn to one big pile of ash, or did we want the dragons and Dothraki to be beaten? A tough decision to be sure. You don't get the nickname Queen of Thorns without being able to throw some shade. We could compile an entire video of badass Olenna moments. Note to self, make that video, but really the feisty Tyrell matriarch has one moment that stands above the rest: her death. After Jaime shows some tactical genius and takes her castle, he foolishly shows mercy to Olenna and gives her poison to drink rather than going with some gruesome execution. Does she fear death? Of course not. She downs the cup like a bouse and then proceeds to confess about how she was responsible for killing the wretched Joffrey. Jaime can do nothing but stand in shock as Olenna freely tells him her entire plan. Why'd she do it? She could have taken the secret to her grave. But Olenna was never one to hold her tongue, and she wanted Cersei to know that it was her. Fierce until the very end. The long night was, well, it was really long. For over an hour, we watched our heroes get their butts kicked by the invading, unstoppable White Walker storm. Some died valiantly. Lyanna, here's looking at you, kid. But it seemed hopeless. When the Night King started his march toward Brienne after dispatching Theon, we weren't sure what was going to happen. Our supposed hero Jon was a little busy with the zombie ice dragon, so who was going to step up and save the day? Much to everyone's surprise, it was Arya who leapt out of nowhere and used her assassin skills to attack the Night King. Her first attack fails, and for a moment we think the Night King is going to snap her neck or turn her into a White Walker or something. But in a cheer-worthy moment, she passes the dagger between hands and ends the Night King once and for all. Say it with us, Arya! Well, that's our video about the most badass moments in Game of Thrones. Do you agree with our list, or are there any others you would include? Be sure to leave a comment below with your most badass moments in the show. And as always, be sure to subscribe for more awesome content.